When I say the name Robin Hood, what do you picture? I'm guessing it's a master archer deep in Sherwood Forest, a hero standing up to a tyrant. But what if I told you the legend you think you know is hiding a much darker and frankly more fascinating story? Let's peel back those layers.
We all know the image, right? A dashing hero dressed in Lincoln green, zipping through the trees with his band of merry men, always ready with a bow and some witty comeback.
And we all know his mission statement. It's the phrase that's basically defined him for centuries. He robs from the rich and gives to the poor. The ultimate story of social justice, yeah? Well, the earliest stories tell a very, very different tale.
And here's where we see this huge gap between the legend we love and the character from the first surviving poems. We see this selfless freedom fighter. But the early sources? They describe a guy who's often brutal, violent, what one historian even calls a full-blooded medieval brigand. Basically, a common thug, not some revolutionary hero.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question we're tackling today. If he wasn't the hero we imagine, then who was the original Robin Hood? Let's deconstruct this legend piece by piece. All right, let's start with his core mission. Try to forget every movie you've ever seen for a minute. What was the Robin Hood from those 15th century ballads actually fighting against?
In the modern stories, the big bads are always Prince John and the oppressive Norman lords. It makes Robin this national hero fighting for the true King Richard. But that entire plotline? It's a much later invention, first popping up in the 16th century. The original stories were way more local. Robin's enemies were greedy, corrupt church officials and, you guessed it, his famous arch-nemesis, the Sheriff of Nottingham.
This quote right here, from one of the earliest ballads, is basically Robin giving his men direct orders. He's saying, go after these bishops and archbishops and keep your eye on the Sheriff of Nottingham. It's not about overthrowing the government, it's about targeting specific, corrupt local leaders. He definitely had an anti-clerical streak, but it was aimed at the greedy abbots, not the faith itself.
Okay, but what about the slogan? His whole reason for being? Surely that was there from the start, right?
Nope, not even close. That iconic phrase doesn't show up in print until the late 16th century. Now, in the early tales, Robin is on the side of the common folk. He tells his men not to harm good yeomen or knights. And in one famous story, he gives a huge loan to a poor knight who's down on his luck. But there's zero mention of some widespread program of redistributing wealth to everybody. His charity was a lot more specific, more personal, not this social crusade we imagine today.
Now let's talk about his crew. Everyone knows the Merry Men, but the original lineup, well, it might surprise you.
So the core trio, they were there from day one. Little John, who's almost as important as Robin himself, Will Scarlet, and Much the Miller's son. But two of the most famous members, Maid Marian and Friar Tuck, they are nowhere to be found in the earliest ballads. They were added to the legend later on, probably from the super popular May Day festivals where Robin Hood plays became a huge deal.
So if Maid Marian wasn't in the picture, who was the most important woman in Robin's life? The answer is pretty wild, and it reveals a side of this character that's been almost totally forgotten.
The original Robin Hood was the devout Catholic, and he had a special devotion to the Virgin Mary. In one ballad, he literally risks his life just to sneak into Nottingham to attend Mass. And when he robs a rich monk, he thanks Our Lady for his success. This deep piety creates this amazing tension with his violent attacks on corrupt church guys. He hated the sin, not the faith.
Which brings us to the ultimate mystery. With all these strange, specific details, was there a real man behind this myth? Historians have been on the hunt for centuries, but the trail is, let's just say it's complicated. Part of the problem is that even the earliest writers couldn't agree on when he lived. Different historians placed him in completely different centuries, from the time of Richard the Lionheart in the 1190s all the way into the 1320s. That kind of confusion makes finding one single historical person almost impossible. Over the years, a few promising suspects have popped up. There's a Robert Hood, a fugitive from York in 1226, a guy named Roger Godberd, a rebel leader from the 1260s, and a Robert Hood of Wakefield, who even served in the king's court for a bit in the 1320s. Each one has these tantalizing little clues that match parts of the legend, but none of them had that definitive smoking gun proof. The evidence is just too thin. So this leads to a really compelling theory. What if Robin Hood wasn't a person's name at all?
Way back in 1262, we see court records using the name Robin as a kind of alias for a known criminal. This suggests that Robin Hood might have just been a nickname for any outlaw, a generic term for a bandit living out in the woods. The legend then might have grown around an archetype, not a single dude.
So whether he was a real guy or just an outlaw's alias, one thing is absolutely for sure. The character of Robin Hood has never, ever stood still. He's a total chameleon, constantly being reinvented to fit the times, transforming from this gritty medieval outlaw into the global icon we all know.
Let's just follow this incredible journey. He starts out in the 15th century ballads as a yeoman, a tough, independent landowner who's both super religious and super violent, a perfect hero for that time. Then, in the 16th century, playwrights give him a status upgrade to appeal to their noble audiences. Boom! He's suddenly the Earl of Huntingdon, giving his rebellion a noble cause. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Sir Walter Scott's novel Ivanhoe turns him into a Saxon patriot fighting the Normans, a perfect hero for an age obsessed with national identity. And finally, 20th century Hollywood gets a hold of him, Errol Flynn smooths off all his rough edges and cements his image as the charming, swashbuckling freedom fighter we love today.
And get this, people have always loved these stories. This is not a modern thing. A Scottish historian writing back in the 1440s was actually complaining that the common folk were so obsessed, they'd rather hear songs about Robin Hood than literally anything else. He was a folk hero superstar from the very beginning.
So here's the takeaway. Robin Hood is more than just one story. He's a mirror. A violent yeoman for a brutal age. A noble lord for a time that cared about bloodlines. A freedom fighter for an era of revolution. He reflects the values and the struggles of every single generation that tells his story. Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. What kind of Robin Hood does our time need?